The roar of the Wimbledon crowd is a sound that can make or break a career. It's the most famous stage in tennis, a place where legends are forged and dreams are crushed under the weight of expectation. For Alex Eala, the young Filipino prodigy, stepping onto those hallowed lawns was supposed to be the crowning moment of her incredible journey. The world was watching, expecting the next chapter in a story written in the stars. After a shocking run that captured hearts and turned heads, the world anticipated her next move. Everyone had an opinion on what she should do next. But then, she did something that nobody saw coming. In a moment that left the tennis world breathless, a young woman who had achieved so much, who had the world at her feet, made a decision that went against every playbook, every expectation, and every piece of advice she had ever been given. It was a choice so out of left field, so bold, that it made people question everything they thought they knew about ambition and success in the high-stakes world of professional sports. This is the story of that decision. This is the story of a champion who looked at the mountain she was supposed to climb, and instead of taking the next step, turned and walked straight into the unknown. It was the kind of story that makes even the most jaded sports fan lean in a little closer. A 17-year-old girl from the Philippines, a nation that had never produced a Grand Slam singles champion, was making a name for herself on the biggest stages in tennis. Her name was Alex Eala, and she wasn't just a participant, she was a winner. In 2022, she made history as the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam junior title, capturing the U.S. Open Girls Singles Championship. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for a country of over 100 million people, a people who poured their hopes and dreams into the tiny racket of this young, powerful athlete. The victory was more than just a tennis match. It was a national triumph, a signal that a new star was rising from Southeast Asia. The tennis world took notice. This was not just a flash in the pan. Eala had been groomed for greatness from a young age, trained at the prestigious Rafael Nadal Academy in Spain. She had the technique, the power, and, more importantly, the fighting spirit that separates the good players from the true greats. Her lefty game was a weapon, and her mental fortitude was already being compared to some of the game's fiercest competitors. The natural progression seemed clear. She would dominate the junior circuit, transition to the pro tour, and soon become a regular feature in the latter rounds of the majors. The blueprint for success in tennis is often predictable. You climb the rankings, earn your stripes, and slowly, deliberately, you build a legacy. But tennis, like life, rarely follows the script. Just a year after her U.S. Open triumph, Eala was back in the spotlight, but this time on the hallowed grass courts of Wimbledon. Now a professional, she was fighting her way through the qualifying rounds. The All England Club is a place that separates the pretenders from the contenders. The pressure is immense, the conditions unforgiving. For many young players, it can be an intimidating and overwhelming experience. For Alex Eala, it was a proving ground, and she was proving to be more resilient than anyone could have imagined. The qualifying tournament, a grueling prelude to the main draw, is where dreams are made and broken. It is a world of unseeded players, wild cards, and desperate veterans, all fighting for one of the few coveted spots in the Grand Slam. Eala navigated this minefield with a composure that belied her age. She won matches she was expected to win, and she dug deep to win matches that seemed to be slipping away. She was not just competing, she was conquering. One victory followed another, and suddenly, the world was watching again. A new narrative was being written. It wasn't just a fairy tale anymore, it was a statement. The girl who had won the U.S. Open junior title was now making a bid to become a major player on the grandest stage of them all. The atmosphere was electric, not just in her team and family but back home, where a nation was staying up late, watching their young heroine fight. But as she prepared for the next challenge, a decision loomed that would change everything. A decision that would make her Wimbledon run look like just the opening chapter in a story far more complex and shocking than anyone ever anticipated. Walking through the tunnels of the All England Club is like stepping into a cathedral of sport. The air is thick with history and the scent of freshly cut grass, a smell that for Alex Eala was quickly becoming synonymous with both triumph and exhaustion. Her journey through the Wimbledon qualifiers was not just a series of matches. It was a brutal test of will. While the media focused on her Cinderella story, what they rarely showed were the quiet, lonely hours in the locker room, the ice baths, the constant physio work on aching joints, and the mental toll of a life spent on the road. She was living out of a suitcase, navigating the intense pressure of representing a nation of 100 million people, all while still trying to figure out who she was as a young adult away from the court. The pressure was relentless. Back home, the Philippines had fully embraced her as their own. Every victory was a national holiday, every loss dissected on morning talk shows. This weight of national expectation is a burden that can crush even the most seasoned athletes, let alone someone who had just recently been a junior player dreaming of this exact moment. Citation 4. Eala had grown up in the spotlight, first as a prodigy at the Rafael Nadal Academy, and now as a flag-bearer for Filipino tennis on the global stage. The dichotomy was staggering. One moment, she was a girl trying to find her favorite snack in a foreign supermarket. The next, she was a national hero expected to deliver glory. Citation 2. As she advanced through the qualifying rounds, the media narrative began to shift. The young prodigy moniker slowly started to be replaced by something more weighty, the contender. Analysts, particularly those on American sports networks, started paying serious attention to her left-handed game and her remarkable composure. They saw her powerful baseline game and her ability to dial in on the biggest points, but they also noticed the cracks. The fatigue was becoming visible. The grueling qualifying schedule had pushed her to her limit, and the physical strain was starting to manifest in her movement. Citation 5. She was surviving, but the spark that defined her junior run was beginning to flicker, dampened by the sheer physical toll of playing high-level tennis week after week. Behind the scenes, the decision-making process was already beginning. The Wimbledon run was a success by any objective measure, but for Eala and her team, it was a moment of reckoning. They could see the trajectory, a grueling climb up the rankings, moving from one tournament to another, living out of hotels, and managing the immense physical demands of the professional tour. It was a road that had chewed up and spit out countless promising talents. The question wasn't just about winning the next match. It was about the long-term health of her body and her mind. Citation 3. The quiet conversations in the locker room and the team meetings were no longer just about game strategy. They were about the sustainability of the life she was leading, a life that was pushing her to a breaking point, even as the world cheered her on. The expectation was for her to push through the pain, to take the next step, to keep climbing. But what if the mountain wasn't the right one to climb? The Wimbledon qualifying tournament was a marathon, but for Alex Eala, it was also a mirror. It reflected something she had been trying to ignore for months. The sheer grind of professional tennis was starting to take its toll. The dream was real, but so was the exhaustion. Her body was sending signals that even the most determined mindset couldn't ignore. The aches were becoming more persistent, the recovery time longer. The teenager who had burst onto the scene with such joy and freedom was now navigating a world where every match felt like a battle against not just an opponent, but against her own physical limits. It was during this period that the whispers of a different path began to grow louder. The tennis world expected her to keep climbing, to push through the pain, to sacrifice everything for the next ranking point. But Eala had a support system that was different from many young prodigies. Her family, her coaches at the Rafael Nadal Academy, they saw the whole picture, not just the highlights. They saw the girl behind the racket, the 18-year-old who had just turned the corner into adulthood, trying to shoulder the weight of a nation. And they began to have conversations that went beyond match strategy and technique. The traditional route in tennis is brutal. You play week in, week out, traveling from one tournament to another, accumulating points, climbing the rankings. It's a conveyor belt of competition that has broken some of the most talented players in history. For Eala, the question wasn't about her talent. It was about the sustainability of her path. Could she keep this up without burning out? Could she continue to chase this dream while preserving her health and her spirit? The Wimbledon run had been a triumph, but it also highlighted the cost. Every victory was celebrated, but behind the scenes, the team was watching her carefully, monitoring the physical toll that the relentless schedule was taking. Then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a single match or a single injury, but a culmination of all the small signs. The fatigue that lingered after matches she would have easily won a year earlier. The frustration that crept into her game. The realization that she was spending more time managing pain than playing freely. The decision that was coming wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of profound wisdom. In a sport that demands you keep pushing, keep fighting, keep ignoring the warning signs, Alex Eala and her team decided to listen to what her body and mind were telling them. It was a choice that would shock the world, a choice that defied every expectation of what a young champion on the rise should do. And it started with a simple, terrifying question. What if the only way forward was to pause? The whispers that had started in the locker rooms of Wimbledon grew into something undeniable. Alex Eala and her team had been having the difficult conversations, the ones no one wants to have when you are on the cusp of greatness. The physical toll of the relentless tour schedule had become impossible to ignore. The aches, the fatigue, the mental exhaustion, they were all pointing to one inevitable conclusion. Something had to change. And when the news finally broke, the tennis world didn't just take notice. It was stunned. What Eala did next was something nobody in the sport had anticipated. She didn't announce a new coach. She didn't sign a massive endorsement deal. She didn't even withdraw from a single tournament to rest up. Instead, she made a decision that went against every instinct of a rising star. She stepped back. Not from the sport entirely, but from the relentless grind. She decided to take a break. A real break. Not a week off between tournaments, but a deliberate pause to let her body and mind recover. It was a choice that flew in the face of conventional tennis wisdom, where the mantra is always to push harder, play more, and climb higher. The reaction was immediate and loud. Fans were confused. Analysts were baffled. How could someone so young, so talented, who had just proven she could compete at the highest level, voluntarily walk away from the momentum she had built? The American media, in particular, struggled to understand it. In the United States, where the narrative is often about relentless pursuit of success, the decision seemed almost counterintuitive. Why would you stop when you are on the verge of breaking through? Was she injured? Was there something else going on? The speculation was rampant. But Eala and her team understood something that the outsiders didn't. They saw the bigger picture. They knew that the path to sustained greatness isn't always a straight line. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is hit pause, to listen to what your body is telling you, and to prioritize long-term health over short-term gains. It was a lesson that many of the game's most heartbreaking stories had taught. Stories of young players who burned out too fast, whose careers were cut short by injuries that could have been prevented with rest. The decision was not a sign of weakness. It was an act of profound strength and wisdom. In a sport that demands you ignore pain and push past limits, Eala was saying, not this time. She was choosing a different path, one that prioritized the athlete over the ranking. And while the world watched, waiting to see if this unusual choice would derail her career or set her up for something even greater, the young Filipino quietly began the process of healing and rebuilding. The story was no longer just about winning matches. It was about defining what success really means. When Alex Eala walked off center court after her victory over Iga Swiatek, she didn't just win a tennis match. She ignited a nation. The Philippines, a country of over 100 million people, had found a new hero. And they weren't just watching. They were celebrating like it was a national holiday. It was a scene straight out of a movie, except this was real, and it was happening in real time. The victory over the defending champion was seismic. By the time Eala stepped onto center court for her fourth-round match against Jasmine Paolini, the world had already taken notice of the phenomenon she had become. The numbers were staggering. Over 1.2 million people had watched the highlights of her win over Swiatek on Wimbledon's official YouTube channel. To put that in perspective, that was more than twice the views of matches featuring legends like Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams. Eala wasn't just a tennis player anymore. She was a cultural event. The support back home was overwhelming. After her victory over Swiatek, the president of the Philippines hailed her as a real inspiration for the youth, calling it just the beginning for the young star. Watch parties sprang up across the archipelago, with Filipinos staying up late into the night to cheer for their champion. In London, fans traveled from all over to support her. Roberto Ocampo Jr., a London-based nurse, captured the sentiment perfectly when he told reporters, "She's like a ray of hope for the Philippines." Especially at her age. She made history. That's one thing that we can tell to the next generation. Eala had become more than an athlete. She was a symbol of what was possible. Growing up, her inspiration had been boxing legend Manny Pacquiao, whose fights would bring the entire country to a standstill. Now, she was experiencing that same phenomenon herself, and she was determined to carry that weight with grace. But the pressure was real. Speaking about her Wimbledon run, Eala was refreshingly honest about the emotional roller coaster. She described the 2026 season as a challenge, admitting that at times, the doubts crept in and it was hard to believe in herself. "Match by match I am feeling better," she said after her loss to Paolini. "I feel more confidence in myself. I'm more positive as well. You can lose, you can win, but the goal is to keep this mindset." It was the mindset of a champion, and it was resonating far beyond the tennis court. The media coverage wasn't just about the wins. Even in defeat, the world was captivated by her story. The tennis establishment was analyzing her game, with legends like Martina Navratilova commenting on her tactical decisions. But for the people of the Philippines, the analysis didn't matter. They saw a young woman who had already achieved the impossible and was carrying their hopes with a smile. The loss to Paolini was painful, but the legacy of that Wimbledon run was already cemented. The center court crowd was electric, buzzing with the energy of a nation's hopes resting on a single racket. Alex Eala, the 21-year-old from Quezon City, was fighting for something bigger than a place in the Wimbledon quarterfinals. She was fighting for history. After stunning the defending champion Iga Swiatek just days earlier, the world expected magic. And for a while, she gave it to them. The match against Jasmine Paolini was a battle of wills. The Italian, a two-time Grand Slam finalist, was a wall, a veteran who had been on this stage before. Eala started nervously, her powerful lefty serve not firing on all cylinders, but she refused to break. Down a set, she dug deep, showing the same grit that had defined her entire Wimbledon run. She broke Paolini's serve, she held her nerve, and she forced a deciding third set. The stadium was on its feet. It felt like destiny was on her side. But destiny had other plans. Paolini, who had been growing increasingly frustrated during the second set, composed herself for the third. The Italian's experience began to show as the young Filipina's serve started to falter. A double fault in the eighth game of the final set, an overhit forehand, and suddenly the fairy tale was over. Paolini served out the match after 2 hours and 22 minutes of grueling tennis, ending Eala's historic campaign with a 6-4 for 6, 6-3 victory. The defeat was crushing, but it was also a revelation. Looking back at that final match, the tennis world was left debating what could have been. Legendary champion Martina Navratilova, commentating for the BBC, was baffled by Eala's strategy. She noted that Eala was barely using her powerful lefty serve to its full advantage, hitting only a third of her serves out wide on the advantage side, a move that Navratilova called crazy. Laura Robson, the former junior Wimbledon champion, offered a different perspective, defending Eala's choices given the lack of raw pace on her serve. The debate highlighted just how much scrutiny the young star was now under. But the loss didn't define her run. What Eala achieved at Wimbledon 2026 was monumental. She became the first player from the Philippines, male or female, to reach the fourth round of a Grand Slam singles tournament in the Open era. She earned 240 WTA ranking points and a career biggest paycheck of £300,000 for her singles run. She left the All England club not as a defeated player, but as a national hero. Her post-match words were not of sorrow, but of grace. "I have days like that. Everyone has days where they don't play their best tennis," she said, reflecting on her serve. "I understand that's part of the job. I'm really proud of how I handled things. I just have to kind of move forward and continue with my progress." And that was the true climax of this story. The win over Swiatek had shocked the world. The loss to Paolini might have ended the tournament, but it did not end her journey. Instead, it cemented her legacy. She was no longer just a promising junior. She was a bona fide star, a symbol of resilience. She had already proven she could beat the best. Now, she was proving she could handle the heartbreak of defeat with the poise of a seasoned champion. The decision she had made to step back, to prioritize her body and mind, now seemed prescient. She was building a career designed to last, not just to burn bright and burn out. The ending of this chapter was not a tragedy, it was a beginning.